It's incredibly important that these sorts of commemorations are happening in 2014, the 70th anniversary of the Hungarian Holocaust. The Hungarian Holocaust in many ways was a uniquely tragic event because prior to this terrible period in Hungarian history, the Jewish community of Hungary was perhaps one of the most assimilated and integrated of all the Jewish communities in Europe. And of course, for me, it's very personal and very private because both of my parents, Tom and Annette Lantos, are Hungarian Holocaust survivors. And my dear late father, who grew up in Szent István Park, took me back there as a little girl when we first visited Hungary. And, of course, as a child, you look up to your dad in particular as sort of invincible. He's something of a Superman in your life. And as he began just in small tidbits to share the story of what happened to him during that dark period of history, how as a proud and passionately patriotic young Hungarian teenager, he became something of a hunted animal in his own country, how his own friends and neighbors turned on him, and how he was really in a fight to survive. It just seemed inconceivable to me at the time. Of course, for both of my parents, the tragedy of what they experienced in Hungary during the war was very affected and, you might say, mitigated by the incredible story of Raoul Wallenberg, their hero, their Moses from the north, who came to try and rescue the Jews of Budapest when it seemed all the world had turned their back on them. And my father eventually, after escaping from forced labor camp multiple times, was able eventually to make his way back to Budapest. And he found his way to one of the Wallenberg safe houses. And safe was not a 100% word because, of course, there were raids against these houses, but still there were thousands upon thousands of Jews who managed to find a degree of refuge packed into those Wallenberg safe houses. And my father was one of those young people. And, he was blonde and he was blue-eyed, and so he became a courier, really, and was able to deliver messages and supplies and play a role in a borrowed SS uniform. He wasn't immediately suspected, and so he, at great risk to himself, roamed across the city of Budapest trying to be of some help to those who were trying to deliver life-saving messages and medicines and other supplies. But it's a time in my father's life that seems unreal to me. And he would sometimes say that as he looked back on it, it seemed unreal to him. It was almost as though these events had happened to someone else, because when you're living through such a nightmare and such danger and such fear, when life resumes a degree of normalcy, I think you yourself question how it was that you survived that time. But he did, both of my parents did, and they were determined that their daughters and that their grandchildren, of whom they had many, they had 17 grandchildren, and they wanted all of us to know what they had endured, what they had suffered, but also that there had been a light shining in the darkness, that there had been a Raoul Wallenberg who came and undertook his incredible mission of rescue and of mercy. And I think that as we reflect, as Hungarians reflect on the tragedy of the Hungarian Holocaust in this year of the 70th anniversary of that dark time, there needs to be a willingness as a nation, as a people, to face the hard truths that 600,000 Jews could never have been murdered, massacred, and deported without the cooperation, and in some cases the eager cooperation, of a large number of Hungarians themselves. But we also need to remember the story of the rescuers. And not all of them were from outside of Hungary like Raoul Wallenberg. There were decent and good Hungarians who stepped up to hide their friends and their neighbors, to assist people like Wallenberg, who undertook his heroic mission of rescue. Perhaps the most important thing about this commemoration of the 70th anniversary of the Hungarian Holocaust is a renewed commitment not to let this history and this legacy be forgotten. As the events of the Holocaust become increasingly remote, we're now at 70 years, it is vitally important that this new and rising generation know the history, the good and the bad, that they face the history, and that they have leaders, community leaders and teachers and religious leaders who encourage them to be upstanders, to be those who will never be bystanders to evil, will never forget the victims of the past, but also will never forget the stories of heroism and humanity that are also part of this important commemoration.